Some people love whiskey, and some just like the way it makes them feel. If you want to grow a real passion for this legendary spirit, you'll need to start with these facts.
There's no denying that many of these carb-heavy, calorie-laden, sugar-filled drinks aren't great for you or your waistline. But choose wisely and choose this drink, and you'll find you can pour yourself an adult beverage with actual health benefits. What drink are we talking about, you ask?
Whiskey.
So you mean whiskey?
What?
You're saying it weird.
Saying what weird?
Red wine gets all the positive press when it comes to an alcoholic drink with health benefits. But scientific research shows that it's actually the bottle of whiskey you should be reaching for. And here's why. Back in ye old times, whiskey was once used for medicinal purposes. It was often found being passed around the battlefields in the bloody aftermath, and it was frequently used as an antiseptic. It's a movie cliche, sure, but a study published in the Annals of Microbiology gave complete credence to the practice. The study looked at just how many different types of bacteria could survive in the ice found at a bar or restaurant. And let's just say that it's not great news. There were 31 different species of bacteria found, including the kind that causes staph infections. Researchers then measured their resistance to different types of alcohol, including whiskey and vodka, as well as different types of mixers and different environmental conditions. Bacteria continued to thrive and swim and do whatever it is bacteria does in all the samples except one. The whiskey was the only drink to get rid of all different types of bacteria. Should you take a flask of whiskey with you whenever you go out? Should you only order whiskey from restaurants and bars? We're not here to tell you how to live your life, but yeah, maybe pump the brakes on that one a little, pal.
Gosh, she drank so much, and so quickly.
But just because we're not advising you to nurse a handle 24/7, that's not to say that a reasonable drink every now and then can't do wonders. Case in point, in September 2018, Britain's Grace Jones turned 112 years old. NPR spoke to this oldest woman in Britain, known to her friends as Amazing Grace, and asked her just what she attributed to her long life. Her answer? Her decades-long practice of having a glass of single malt whiskey every night before bed.
She puts her longevity down to the nightly tot of whiskey she still enjoys.
My little drop of whiskey. I don't drink anything else.
It sounds too good to be true, right? It might not be. A slew of scientific research has found whiskey has some fascinating properties. Take the high concentration of ellagic acid. Those are the antioxidants that help your body destroy rogue cells. In other words, it helps fight a ton of different diseases. It's the same thing that's in wine, but whiskey has tons more of these little warriors. And speaking of antioxidants, let's take a look at the age-old belief that a hot toddy is exactly what the doctor ordered when you're suffering from a cold. The drink, traditionally made with hot water, whiskey, honey, and lemon, is basically medicine, according to Dr. William Schaffner, chair of preventative medicine at Vanderbilt University. Okay, so maybe it's not going to cure your cold, but it is going to lessen your symptoms. The hot water will help clear congestion, and the honey is going to soothe your sore throat. Meanwhile, that magic whiskey is going to dilate blood vessels, relieve that swollen feeling, and encourage your immune system to deal with the infection. A hot toddy just before bed might also help you fall asleep faster. And sleep is the real hero here. Oddly enough, all this scientific research is just verifying what our ancestors already knew, says the Scotsman. This traditional drink of Ireland and Britain was originally given the name Ushkaba, which translates to water of life, and a 16th century treatise by a historian named Raphael Holinshed shows just how valued whiskey was as a cure-all. He writes, "Being moderately taken, it slows the age, cuts phlegm, helps digestion, cures the dropsy, it heals the strangulation, keeps and preserves the head from whirling, the tongue from lisping, the stomach from wobbling, the guts from rumbling, the hands from shivering, the bones from aching, and it truly is a sovereign liquor if it be orderly taken." You can't get more of a glowing recommendation than that, can you? Now that science is starting to back up all the praise whiskey has been garnering over the years, and it's becoming clear that there's more to whiskey than meets the eye, you have all the reasons you need to keep a few bottles for more than just special occasions. After all, everybody knows that age-old adage.
A shark on whiskey is mighty risky. A shark on beer is a beer engineer.
Or something like that.
Fireball came seemingly out of nowhere to quickly become one of the most popular alcoholic beverages around. The brand has skyrocketed to record-soaring numbers and has somehow turned into a go-to brand among a broad demographic, from college students to grandparents. Here's the untold truth of the cinnamon whiskey. There's one thing you should know about Fireball Cinnamon Whiskey before you open a bottle. It's not really whiskey. Just about anywhere in the world, a spirit needs to be at least 40% alcohol by volume, or ABV, in order to legally be called whiskey. So why is Fireball allowed to be called whiskey? Regulations in Canada, where the spirit is distilled, dictate that anything labeled, quote, Canadian whiskey must meet the 40% ABV threshold. There is no such rule, however, about products simply labeled whiskey. These spirits just need to be made from a whiskey base. Fireball is made by adding cinnamon flavoring to traditional Canadian whiskey. Therefore, it is legally allowed to be called whiskey, just not Canadian whiskey. In the United States, meanwhile, flavored whiskey is allowed to be designated as such so long as it is at least 60 proof, 30% ABV, and the predominant flavor is included in the name. Add all of these rules together, and you now know why it's called Fireball Cinnamon Whiskey.
I haven't had a drink of whiskey or slept in a bed in 10 days. Give me a bottle.
It's easy to think that Fireball is a relatively new product, but while its popularity may have skyrocketed in recent years, the spicy booze has actually been around for over 30 years. What we know today as Fireball Cinnamon Whiskey was originally developed in the mid-1980s by the Canadian beverage company Joseph E. Seagram & Sons. It was known back then as Dr. McGillicuddy's Fireball Whiskey, part of a product line of flavored schnapps that still exists today. Dr. McGillicuddy was a completely fictional person, in case you're wondering. For many years, the cinnamon liqueur was primarily sold north of the border. In 1989, the American-based Sazerac Company purchased the rights to the entire Dr. McGillicuddy line of spirits and attempted to increase sales in the United States. As part of an advertising stunt, Sazerac paid a town in North Dakota to temporarily change its name to McGillicuddy City in exchange for $100,000, according to the Associated Press. While the promotion may have helped put the rural community on the map, there's no proof it helped sell any more schnapps. In fact, it would take another decade before the brand cinnamon whiskey became a household name. If it feels to you like Fireball whiskey came out of nowhere, you're right. Although the alcoholic beverage we know as Fireball has been around for decades, its name and branding are much more recent creations. After the Sazerac Company purchased the rights to what was then known as Dr. McGillicuddy's Fireball Whiskey in 1989, it didn't alter much of anything about the liqueur. That all changed in 2007, when the company rebranded the drink as Fireball Cinnamon Whiskey, gave it a new logo, and unleashed a cross-country grassroots marketing campaign. As part of the sales push, company representatives visited local bars, giving away free shots, and interacting with employees on social media. A Sazerac Company spokesman told the Huffington Post, "We don't go into bars and hire girls and force people to take a shot. What we have been doing is pushing engagement with people in the industry, particularly bartenders. Whatever they were doing, it was working." Fireball whiskey went from being unheard of to the drink of choice at parties and bars nationwide, all within a few short years. According to Bravo, from 2011 to 2013, Fireball sales increased by nearly $60 million, and those figures only accounted for bottle sales from retail stores, not drink purchases at bars. Once Fireball got its new name and logo, it was off and running. According to The Motley Fool, sales of Fireball jumped from less than $2 million in 2011 to $131 million in 2014. The latter total made it the 7th most popular liquor brand in the United States, according to CNN. But the $131 million figure only accounted for bottle sales from the shelf, not drink purchases at bars, where Fireball was an even hotter commodity. Bar sales of the cinnamon liqueur that same year accounted for roughly $530 million in additional revenue, for an estimated sum of $863.5 million, double its total from the year before. While Fireball isn't sneaking up on anyone these days, and it's no longer the shiny new bottle behind the bar, it's still on the rise. The Beverage Information and Insights Group reported that Fireball sales increased by nearly 8% from 2018 to 2019. This continued growth has established the flavored whiskey as one of the most popular alcoholic beverages, not just in America, but around the globe. Fireball's catapulted rise hit a momentary blip several years ago, thanks to some unflattering headlines out of Europe. In October 2014, Norway, Sweden, and Finland recalled the liqueur for having excessive levels of propylene glycol, an ingredient also found in antifreeze. It turns out the whole ordeal was much ado about nothing. Unbeknownst to most, propylene glycol is commonly used as a flavor enhancer in food and drinks.
It helps to sort of add a little consistency and prevent coagulation in certain products, so a lot of icings, a lot of cake products.
Although propylene glycol has been declared safe by authorities in both the US and Europe, the former allows for higher levels of the ingredient. Therefore, there are two different Fireball recipes for North America and Europe. Norway, Sweden, and Finland were shipped the wrong batch of the liqueur, which contains an illegal amount of propylene glycol and had to be pulled from the shelves. The company stated at the time, "Unfortunately, Fireball shipped its North American formula to Europe and found that one ingredient is out of compliance with European regulations. Unfortunately for Fireball, the damage was done." To this day, you'll still find people asking if the spirit contains antifreeze. The company is clearly a little bitter about the situation. On its FAQ page, it makes this clear. Fireball does not contain any antifreeze at all. And the suggestion is ridiculous. Sadly, this is the media's way of crafting attention-grabbing headlines, but it simply is not true. You know you've reached success when others start trying to copy you, and that's precisely what happened to Fireball. Not long after the spicy liqueur became a mainstay behind every bar, did other spirit companies try to get in on the cinnamon whiskey trend. There was Sinfire Cinnamon Whiskey from Hood River Distillers and Stout Brewing Company's Fire Flask. Sazerac, Fireball's parent company, sued both for trademark infringement, according to the spirit business. Then the big boys entered the picture. In 2014, Jim Beam unveiled Kentucky Fire, a red-hot cinnamon liqueur. Chris Potter, general manager of whiskeys at Beam Suntory, said in a press release, "We've led the category in flavor innovation in recent years, but our latest flavor certainly turns up the heat. We're thrilled with the initial excitement we've seen for Jim Beam Kentucky Fire." A year later, Jack Daniel's introduced its Tennessee Fire Cinnamon Whiskey, a mix of two of the brand's pre-existing spirits, Old No. 7 Tennessee Whiskey and cinnamon liqueur. According to the Los Angeles Times, it was Jack Daniel's first new flavor since 2011. Tennessee Fire didn't go unnoticed by Sazerac. The manufacturer sued Jack Daniel's for allegedly using Google advertising to send users looking for Fireball to search result pages for Tennessee Fire, according to the spirit business. Let's be honest, no one drinks alcohol for its nutritional value. We all know booze isn't great for our health, so if one particular drink has a few more calories or a little extra sugar, it's not going to raise many red flags. But you should know what you're getting into when you drink Fireball, because the sweetened spirit doesn't just have a little more sugar than most drinks, it has a lot more. The process of making Fireball begins with a base of Canadian whiskey. Then comes the sweet stuff. This includes real cinnamon as well as sugar. Just how much sugar? One shot of Fireball, about 1.5 ounces, contains a whopping 11 grams of sugar. If that doesn't sound like a lot, think again. The folks at Drink Spirits put the sugar content into perspective. Those 11 grams equals 0.38 ounces, which is roughly 25% of the shot. And remember, Fireball is only 33% ABV, meaning there is almost as much sugar in the sweet liqueur as there is alcohol. All that sweetness can take a toll on your body. According to GQ, sugary drinks are more likely to cause hangovers and less likely to provide the desired tipsy effect. Fireball's meteoric rise has made it popular with just about every demographic, from college students to their grandmas. But there may be no group of people who enjoy drinking the cinnamon liqueur, or at least singing about, more than country music artists. The whiskey is name-dropped in a number of country songs, including Blake Shelton's Buzzin' and Florida Georgia Line's Round Here. And let's not forget about Taylor Swift. In 2018, Swift joined famed country music songwriter Craig Wiseman on stage at Nashville's Bluebird Cafe. According to the Tennessean, Wiseman told the crowd a story about an after-party he held following the CMT Awards. When Swift arrived, she requested access to the Fireball whiskey shot room. Wiseman said, "I got her a shot of Fireball, and then I got her another one. For the rest of the party, I would go get a shot of Fireball. I don't even know if she took it, but it disappeared." The two laughed it off with shots of Fireball before getting back to the music. You can't reach the highest level of the popularity stratosphere these days without going viral. Fortunately for Fireball, a number of popular videos featuring the cinnamon liqueur have been widely circulated around the internet in recent years. GQ even asked actor Chris Pratt to film a video in which he provides acting advice. He chose to do so after taking several shots of Fireball, even taking one while filming. The clip has since garnered more than 2 million views on YouTube.
Let's say you forget about your spouse's birthday and they confront you about it. Simple. You just be honest.
Fireball does a great job creating its own video content, consistently producing them for its platforms. As you can imagine, the company releases quite a bit of spooky-themed vids around Halloween. So there's no shortage of Fireball shots and creative videos to promote the brand and entertain customers. Keep them coming, Fireball. We like your style. Fireball has become one of the go-to shots for partiers, meaning it's easy for a group to run out of the cinnamon liqueur. The company came up with a solution to that problem. In September, the brand started selling the Fire Keg, which is filled with a whopping 5 liters of Fireball. For those uninterested in crunching numbers, 5 liters equals 115 shots of the spicy spirit, more than enough to keep you and your friends busy for quite some time. It comes with 3 pouring spouts to prevent any in-party jostling. The Fire Keg retails for roughly $75 and is now available for purchase at retailers across the country. The Fire Keg isn't the only party-related Fireball product, however. The company also sells a pack of 30 25-milliliter prepackaged shots known as Peel and Party shots, as well as a party bucket of 20 50-milliliter Fireball bottles.
Did you know that Kirkland has 10 signature whiskeys? We did. That's why we're giving you the truth behind this Costco brand of booze, which not only stacks up against labels like Crown Royal, but it's also cheaper to buy. You can't always blame cheap liquor for a bad hangover. There are studies that show that inexpensive booze might not always be your worst enemy, according to Vice. But fans of Costco's uber-cheap alcohol probably didn't need a study to tell them that. Among the many positive Reddit reviews of their private label whiskey is a comment that reads, "It's like everything Kirkland signature, better than what you paid for it." Even if not, quote, everything, most of them have a surprisingly high quality for the price. According to whiskey expert Joseph V. McAuliffe, Kirkland Signature has 10 different whiskey expressions under its umbrella. 4 Scotch whiskies, 3 bourbons, a Canadian whiskey, a Tennessee whiskey, and an Irish whiskey. The Scotch expressions include a blended Scotch whiskey and a 12-year-old expression of it, single malt Scotch whiskey, and a 20-year-old and 22-year-old Speyside sherry cask finish, besides a 23-year-old single malt sherry cask finish and an Islay single malt Scotch whiskey that were later released by Costco, as per McAuliffe's article on Forbes.
Welcome to Costco. I love you. Welcome to Costco. I love you.
Costco has never officially revealed who makes its whiskey, but those who shop for their favorite tipples at the big box store can't stop being curious, and one of them took to Reddit to pose the question we all have on our minds. Does Costco make their own whiskey? As per the author of the book, Hacking Whiskey, Aaron Goldfarb, nope, Costco does not make its whiskeys, but sources them from other distilleries. Which distilleries, though? Goldfarb asked the same question to Costco's then assistant merchandise manager, Annette Alvarez-Peters, who said, "Thank you for asking, but again, we don't disclose how we develop Kirkland Signature. Sure, Costco hasn't given away any names of distilleries, but there are heaps of theories out there anyway about the provenance of Costco whiskeys. One thing is for sure, though, David Schick, lead retail analyst at Consumer Edge Research, told Bloomberg, they use very high-end producers, premium all the way up to super premium and beyond. Name a Canadian whiskey. Did you think of Crown Royal? We did too. After all, according to whiskey expert Joseph E. McAuliffe on Forbes, it is the most popular Canadian whiskey in the US, accounting for more sales than all of the other Canadian whiskeys combined. And since Kirkland Signature Canadian whiskey tastes and even looks a lot like Crown Royal, according to Thrillist, it's only natural there are strong rumors about both drinks being produced in the same distillery, Gimli in Manitoba, Canada. However, McAuliffe mentioned that older bottles of Kirkland's Canadian whiskey were imported by Worldwide Importers, a company that was once associated with Sazerac. Sazerac owns the Old Montreal Distillery in Quebec. McAuliffe adds, "For now at least, Sazerac isn't talking, so the source of the whiskey remains a mystery." While it's hard to put a finger on a distillery, what's for sure is that it's from Canada. It has to be for it to be called a Canadian whiskey, according to Angel's Envy. While Costco wraps its other spirits in a cloak of secrecy, when it comes to their Tennessee Sour Mash whiskey, where it's made is more obvious. According to whiskey expert Josephine McAuliffe, a whiskey has to be made and aged in Tennessee and run through charcoal chips made of maple wood for it to be called a, quote, Tennessee whiskey, according to Forbes. The Sour Mash bottles have the name of both the master distiller, Mike Williams, and the distilling company, Tennessee Distilling Limited, on it, the same distillery where the popular Sour Mash whiskey, Callier and McKeel, is made. According to Williams, Tennessee Distilling Limited makes whiskeys under both their own brand label and for private labels, like Costco's Kirkland Signature. Whether it be the whiskey for their brand or any private label, Williams said, they make them with the same quality and with the same care that we would make a brand that was our own brand. That's what we have tried to do with Costco's whiskey. Kirkland Signature's single malt Scotch whiskies come from the Speyside and Islay areas of Scotland. We know that because the names of the two Scottish regions are mentioned on the bottle. But here's the catch. Speyside has over 50 distilleries and Islay is literally called the, quote, Whiskey Island since it has a ton of distilleries. Which distillery does Costco's Scotch come from? Nobody will tell. All we know is what Cameron Johnston, brand manager at Alexander Murray and Company, said about the single malt Scotch whiskies being sourced from a bunch of different distilleries, according to Forbes. The bottles mention Alexander Murray & Co. as the manufacturer. The California-based company, per whiskey expert Joseph E. McAuliffe, is the same that provides whiskeys to your neighborhood supermarket Trader Joe's and the alcohol retailer Total Wine. But where do they source the Scotch from? The talk is that all the Scotch comes from Tullibardine Distillery in the Highlands of Scotland, according to Punch. Though with no proof, it remains a rumor. However, what we know for sure is that Costco did previously partner with the Macallan distillery that's based in the Speyside region to sell Macallan 18 under their Kirkland Signature label. Kirkland Signature offers 3 Kentucky straight bourbons: small batch, which is 92% alcohol by volume or ABV, bottled in bond 100% ABV, and single barrel, which is 120% ABV, according to the May 2021 edition of Costco Connection magazine. Costco has been open about its partnership with Barton 1792 Distillery to bring out the bourbon offerings. Barton 1792 is a big deal in the bourbon world. Its 1792 full-proof bourbon was the, quote, World Whiskey of the Year in Jim Murray's Whiskey Bible 2020, which is a list that shakes up the whiskey world annually.
On every change in the environment, you'll eventually taste in a glass of bourbon. In a lot of ways, it's like drinking history.
To be called a bourbon, the spirit has to be made in the United States, not necessarily in the Bourbon County of Kentucky, as is widely believed, but anywhere in the U.S. The only catch, the whiskey has to be at least 40% alcohol by volume and aged in new oak barrels. Have you ever wrongly guessed that Costco's Canadian whiskey was Crown Royal? It's not just you. 4 out of the 10 tasters mistook Costco's Canadian whiskey to be Crown Royal in a BuzzFeed taste test. As noted by bartender and co-owner of Denver's Curio Bar, Stuart Jensen, Costco's, quote, thin, dry, and high-pitched Canadian whiskey has just a wee bit more spice in it, according to Thrillist. It turns out many of the other Kirkland signature whiskeys also taste like knockoffs of expensive ones. Jensen found Costco's blend Scotch whiskey is reminiscent of a Dewar's white label, and 50% of those who took a blind taste test of Costco's Irish whiskey and Jameson confused Costco's with the most popular Irish whiskey in the United States, according to Liquor.com. About Costco's Tennessee Sour Mash, one Redditor said, I tasted Costco's Tennessee Sour Mash and Jack side by side and prefer the Kirkland. It tasted sweeter and more mellow than Jack. You don't want to splurge, but also don't want to buy a bulk of booze that no one's heard of. Costco gets it. Their private label whiskeys seem to emulate the taste of the popular name brands, all while keeping the cost very Costco-esque. For example, a Kirkland Signature Speyside single malt whiskey aged 25 years is about $89. In comparison, according to Punch, a typical Speyside 25-year-old from, say, Glenfarclas hits shelves around $200. Kirkland's Canadian whiskey is priced at less than $20 for a 1.75-liter bottle, nearly half the rate of its taste-alike Crown Royal, according to Forbes, and Kirkland's Tennessee Sour Mash whiskey price is at around $18.99. Again, less than the Jack Daniels that people often confuse it with. Impressive, but how does Costco do it? As we already established, Costco doesn't make its own whiskeys, but sources them from other distilleries. While Costco's lips have always remained zipped about the topic, there are speculations that the big box chain has a deal with some big names in the whiskeyverse, such as Diageo and Edrington, to source alcohol in large quantities for cheap, per Punch.
This is nice. What is this?
Canadian whiskey.
The report suggests that many distilleries are keen on giving away barrels of alcohol for want of space and to maintain strict standards on their own brands. Costco imports the whiskey on a large volume, low-rate basis and sells them at an even lower rate, which it does a darn good job of. Kirkland Signature alcohol has earned cult status. No offense to the chocolate-covered almonds and peanut butter pretzels at Costco, but according to a 2017 Bloomberg report, Costco liquor performed better than their food, and Kirkland Signature liquor was a key reason, noted the Mercury News. The company is pretty selective about what it displays in its liquor aisle. Annette Alvarez-Peters, who used to manage the alcohol division at Costco, explained that it's quite important for them that every item must perform in volume with the limited item assortment we constantly evaluate. And as it turns out, Kirkland Signature has under its umbrella some of the best whiskeys in the world. For example, Kirkland's Signature Small Batch Bourbon at 46% ABV won the Silver Award. Kirkland's Bottled in Bond Bourbon at 50% ABV won the Gold in 2021 at the Whiskies of the World Awards. Meanwhile, their blended Scotch whiskey and Canadian whiskey have been given the exceptional rating by Tastings, a beverage testing institute.
Did you know Crown Royal was originally blended for actual royalty? Or that there are bottles of a special blend that cost 5 figures? Keep watching to find out all of this Canadian whiskey's secrets. While the popularity of Crown Royal may come and go in waves, it's certainly not a new spirit. The very first batch of Crown Royal was made in Canada in 1939, over 8 decades ago. Fast forward 25 years after its debut in Canada, and the whiskey was finally released in the United States to broaden its distribution. Crown Royal was made available in the United States in 1964, becoming one of the top-selling Canadian whiskeys on the U.S. market. Since the first product was released, the popular brand has continued to expand, including several different whiskey lines. The Signature Series and Flavor Series continue to offer approachable whiskey options for anyone to enjoy at home or the bar, while other, more complex and rare options, such as wine barrel-aged whiskey or cognac-finished whiskey, are offered through the Master Series. Crown Royal certainly has a catchy, appealing name, and has become a recognizable household name throughout the United States and Canada. Who wouldn't want to sip a whiskey that's truly fit for a royal? It even has a glamorous bejeweled crown on the label. But surely that's marketing smoke and mirrors, right? Well, as it turns out, it was created for a pair of very real monarchs. In 1939, King George VI and Queen Elizabeth of the United Kingdom were scheduled to visit Canada. Until then, a reigning monarch had never made the trip to Canada across the Atlantic Ocean. So it was certainly an occasion to celebrate in the eyes of many Canadians. And as with so many celebrations, the occasion came with the need to raise a glass. Crown Royal's developer was tasked with blending and distilling a batch of Canadian whiskey fit for the royals. After more than 600 blends, Crown Royal was born. And how did the powerful duo like it? According to Crown Royal, all 10 cases of whiskey bottled and packaged in the trademark purple bags were consumed throughout the King and Queen's journey on the railroad across Canada. That's a pretty good review. Next to other market options such as Canadian Club and Black Velvet, Crown Royal certainly holds strong as one of the most popular Canadian whiskey options on the market. Unlike some other brands, which might choose to outsource their production efforts, this distilled and aged sipper has continued to be produced in Canada since its inception in 1939. Today, the Crown Royal Distillery churns out delicious whiskey in the central part of the country in Gimli, Manitoba. Located along the shores of Canada's Lake Winnipeg, Gimli's population is quite small. As of Canada's 2016 census, the town was home to just 2,246 residents. The Crown Royal production facility, spanning 360 acres, is made up of 51 warehouses that house hundreds of barrels of Crown Royal. It has to hold on to those for a while. This is because the whiskey inside the barrels must be aged before it's bottled, bagged, and shipped throughout the world to waiting Crown Royal aficionados. How much would you be willing to spend on booze? Of course, the answer to that question depends on quite a few factors, from the exact type of alcohol you're considering to the state of your finances. While for many, a splurge might be fine from time to time, there are limits. And most of us surely agree that spending $10,000 on a bottle of Canadian whiskey certainly isn't something to laugh about. In 2007, Crown Royal produced the Crown Royal XR Heritage Blend.
The Crown Royal XR is special because of the Waterloo Distillery. The Waterloo Distillery imparted a particular flavor that lasted through time.
It would have quite a high of a price tag, that is, if it was ever actually for sale. The bottle was Crown Royal's way of honoring Queen Elizabeth II when she visited the Kentucky Derby at Churchill Downs in 2007. Just as Crown Royal got its start by hoping to impress the royals, this was a logical modern-day project. It was also quite the honor after the company had created the first-ever Crown Royal blend for Queen Elizabeth II's parents almost 70 years before. The bottle was a blend of rare heritage whiskey, bottled in a custom-made glass decanter with gold leafing. No word on whether or not the famously rule-bound Queen Elizabeth actually tried it, and certainly no one else seems to have had a chance to sip it and tell of their experience. Crown Royal has been packaging its short and stout bottles and velvet purple bags since the very beginning. Even that first bottle presented to King George VI and Queen Elizabeth was decanted and then put into that regal purple bag for delivery. It's become a recognizable symbol of Crown Royal ever since. But now, Crown Royal is using those classic purple bags for another mission, and perhaps something even more meaningful. Crown Royal launched its official Purple Bag Project initiative in 2018. 2018. The Purple Bag Project aims to send care packages in the classic purple bag to service members overseas. Bags include items such as food, personal care items, and even handwritten notes to brighten the day of those serving in the military and to remind them that their sacrifice does not go unacknowledged. Country music artist Thomas Rhett supported the project as it distributed over 1 million of these packages. They were delivered not only to active-duty military personnel, but also to people affected by natural disasters, and all by the end of 2020. Canned cocktails are certainly not a new concept on the market anymore. What with the rise of canned wines, mixed drinks, and their close cousins, the hard seltzers like White Claw. For many consumers, the ease of being able to pop open the top of a can and take a sip of a cocktail is as refreshing as can be. With that appeal, canned cocktails have continued to increase in popularity exponentially, with new releases each season. With a 20% jump in canned cocktail market growth from 2016 to 2019, Crown Royal recognized it was time to officially jump on the bandwagon. As of March 2021, Crown Royal officially got in the game with its line of canned cocktails, introducing 3 flavors. Grabbing a Crown Royal whiskey and cola is more convenient than ever.
For more than 150 years, Jack Daniel's Old No. 7 Tennessee Whiskey has been one of the world's best-selling whiskeys. The brand has carved out a special place in the hearts of whiskey lovers while capturing a serious chunk of market. And here's what you might not know about it. According to the company's media site, Jack Daniel's was registered in 1866 and boasts the distinction of being the first distillery to be registered in the U.S. and is officially designated with the National Register of Historic Places. But is it actually America's oldest distillery? A 2011 report in the Wall Street Journal noted that there's no actual way to prove it and pointed to some adjustments that Jack Daniel's was making to its iconic label to address some issues related to the company's age. As Journal reporter Barry Newman explained, a Jack Daniel's historian revealed that the only proof of that 1866 date is one old photograph showing established 1866 scrawled in runny paint on the wall of Jack Daniel's office, which had since been painted over. The new label, noted Newman, maintained the distillery's claim of being established in 1866. However, there is no other evidence to verify that the company's registration is indeed America's oldest. Each bottle of Jack Daniel's Tennessee Whiskey is the result of a meticulous, painstaking process, right down to the quality of the water that's used in the distillation. In fact, notes the distillery's website, the water used in Jack Daniel's all comes from the same source, Cave Spring Hollow in Lynchburg. Jack Daniel purchased the spring and surrounding land for the then hefty price of $2,148, after realizing the spring water would be a crucial component in his whiskey. According to the website, this natural spring is refreshed with 800 gallons of water per minute, flowing from miles beneath the surface of the earth at a constant temperature of 56 degrees Fahrenheit. The Jack Daniel's distillery not only makes whiskey, the company also produces its own barrels, in which the whiskey is aged. As the distillery pointed out on its website, the whiskey draws its famous rich amber color and much of its distinctive flavor from the wooden barrels. Leaving nothing to chance, the custom-made barrels are crafted from American white oak. You won't find any glue or nails. Instead, the barrels are held together by the pressure created by precisely arranging 33 wood staves of varying sizes. Because this is such a painstaking and exacting process, each barrel is made by hand, not on an assembly line. The inside of the barrels are then hit with flames until they're charred. This is necessary to extract the natural sugar from the wood so it can become caramelized, as that sugar is integral in providing the whiskey's distinctive flavor. Jack Daniel's does not reuse its barrels. After a single use, they're then sold to hot sauce makers, beer brewers, and Scotch whiskey distillers to be used in making other products. As the company website states, "We like to think we've done our part to help make these products just a little better." Making its own handcrafted single-use barrels isn't the only thing that sets Jack Daniel's apart from other distilleries. In fact, the Lynchburg distillery is also famed for having its own dedicated fire department. As it turns out, there's a very practical reason for that. As USA Today reported, a storage facility hosting thousands of barrels of alcohol is a pretty severe fire hazard, meaning great care must be taken to ensure the distillery and its contents don't erupt in flames. It's happened before. Jim Beam has suffered a massive fire in 2019. It's a particularly huge deal for Jack Daniel's. Master distiller Jeff Arnett says, "Every drop of Jack Daniel's is made here." As Arnett explained, if the place were to burn down, the company has no second distillery and would suddenly have no product, and that would be a huge problem. With that in mind, Jack Daniel's has developed their own fire prevention system, including its own private fire department with a team of 34 volunteer firefighters. In addition, the company has invested more than $4 million into equipment such
such as custom-built fire trucks, foam cannons, and a $400,000 training facility in which firefighters can practice extinguishing both simulated and actual whiskey fires. One of the enduring results of Prohibition was the establishment of so-called dry counties in some states, in which the purchase of alcohol is illegal. While most of America re-legalized booze after Prohibition was repealed in the 21st Amendment, some areas of the country stayed dry and remain so today. Therefore, it's beyond ironic that Jack Daniel's, one of the world's largest distillers, is located in Lynchburg, Tennessee, situated in a dry county. According to the local Moore County News, in order for a Tennessee county to be allowed to sell intoxicating liquor, a referendum vote must be held. Lynchburg, however, never did put that to a vote and is still dry. The only exception to that law is the White Rabbit Bottle Shop located within the Jack Daniel's Distillery's Visitor Center, where those touring the facility can purchase a commemorative bottle as a keepsake of their visit.
Whiskey. One for Ahab there.
When it comes to knowledge of Jack Daniel's, there's likely nobody on the planet more knowledgeable than Master Distiller Jeff Arnett. Arnett, who's only the 7th Master Distiller the company has had since its founding, spoke with Thrillist about what goes into the whiskey's distinctive flavor. A big part of the process is charcoal mellowing, in which the whiskey is filtered through special handcrafted charcoal, typically taking about 3 to 5 days for the whiskey to work its way through the charcoal. Why do this? Arnett says, it actually brings out the sweetness in the corn. It's so important that the process has been nicknamed the extra blessing. And as Arnett pointed out, the charcoal mellowing achieves in days what would take additional years of aging within a charred barrel. However, Arnett was adamant that barrel aging is still the most crucial aspect of the whiskey making process, explaining, there's no other one thing in terms of flavor and color that's as important as the barrel. Anyone familiar with Jack Daniel's whiskey will immediately recognize the words Old No. 7 on the brand's iconic label. While Old No. 7 identifies the distillery's most popular whiskey, what it actually refers to is actually unknown. In fact, even Jeff Arnett has admitted that he has no idea what it means. There has been much speculation over the years about the significance of the number 7, whether it was referring to a particular recipe, a lucky number, or even the number of girlfriends of distillery founder Jack Daniel. However, there is no definitive proof that any of those theories have any validity. Arnett told Business Insider, there's a lot of, mystery and myth that has formed around it, whether it was a lucky number or whether it was a recipe number. At the end of the day, the truth is we don't know. Jack named the brand, and it was a secret that he took to his grave. While Jack Daniel's Old No. 7 Tennessee whiskey remains the brand's biggest seller, in recent years there have been other varieties introduced under the Jack Daniel's brand. Among these is Tennessee Rye, which has a higher percentage of rye, 70%, than Old No. 7, described as being undeniably spicy and complex yet sippin' smooth. Then there's the Single Barrel Collection, which includes Single Barrel Select and Single Barrel Rye, Single Barrel Barrel Strength, and Single Barrel 100 Proof. Also available is Gentleman Jack, which has undergone a second run through the charcoal mellowing process to result in an even smoother whiskey, and what they described as a balanced oak flavor with notes of caramel and vanilla. Meanwhile, fans of legendary singer-actor Frank Sinatra will want to sample Sinatra Select, aged in specially constructed Sinatra barrels, with deep grooves carved into the barrel staves in order to increase the whiskey's exposure to the charred white oak. There are also a pair of flavored whiskeys. Tennessee Fire blends cinnamon liqueur with No. 7 to result in what's said to be a classic spirit with a surprisingly smooth finish, while Tennessee Honey is described as a unique honey liqueur of our own making that offers a taste of the unexpected. Jack Daniel's has had a long association with music as a sponsor of musical performances and specific bands, and that's something that goes all the way back to the distillery's founder. According to the company's website, after Jack Daniel set up his distillery in Lynchburg, Tennessee, he bought some mail-order musical instruments that he gave to some of the more musically inclined members of the community. In an interview with Thrillist, Jeff Arnett offered his insight into the distillery founder's affinity for music, saying, Jack Daniel never married and never had kids. He had two passions, whiskey and music. According to Arnett, Daniel started his own group, the Silver Cornet Band, and would perform in Lynchburg's town square. Of course, there was also a smart business strategy behind the music, given that Daniel owned 2 bars in that square, and the music produced lured thirsty revelers into his drinking establishments. Frank Sinatra was not averse to enjoying an adult beverage, and his drink of choice was Jack Daniel's. As Jeff Arnett recalls,
and it was not that uncommon for Frank back in the mid-50s to hold up a glass of Jack Daniel's on stage and say that this is Jack Daniel's and it's the nectar of the gods.
In fact, Arnett credits Sinatra's loyalty to the whiskey for transforming Jack Daniel's from a small regional brand to being a household name. In fact, the company was so thankful for Sinatra's patronage that a Jack Daniel's sales rep ensured there was always a case delivered to Sinatra's dressing room whenever he was performing. Sinatra's affection for Jack Daniel's managed to outlive him. According to Smithsonian Magazine, he was buried with a bottle of Jack Daniel's whiskey, a pack of Camel cigarettes, a Zippo lighter, and $1 worth of dimes. Why the dimes? Just in case he had an opportunity to use a payphone in the afterlife.
One of the most distinctive aspects of the Jack Daniel's Distillery Tour is that visitors to the Lynchburg, Tennessee landmark learn about the bizarre circumstances behind the death of founder Jack Daniel. They'll also get a personal glimpse of his killer, a large metal safe. The story goes that Daniel arrived in his office early one morning before anyone else had arrived. Needing something that was stashed in the safe, Daniel became so frustrated when he couldn't remember the combination that he gave the safe a good solid kick, something that worked out better for the safe than the toe he injured in his angry outburst. That injury led to an infection that spread from his toe to his foot, which had to be amputated when it became gangrenous. Unfortunately, the infection spread even further, necessitating the amputation of his entire leg. Daniel ultimately died at age 61 on October 8, 1911, from complications from the infection that began in his toe. According to Business Insider, tour guides have been known to tell distillery visitors that Daniel could have warded off infection and prevented his death if he had simply dipped his toe in a glass of his own whiskey, although we'd recommend you just stick to drinking it.
Generally, bourbon and whiskey both are made using a variety of grains in their mash, including malted barley, rye, wheat, and corn. To be considered authentic bourbon, the mix must contain corn. Whiskey, on the other hand, doesn't make the same demand. Bourbon made in the United States must meet a minimum standard of 51% corn in their grain blend. Anything beyond or in addition to that is the distiller's choice, though most bourbons tend to use more corn, usually between 65% to 75%. While many believe corn plays a part in bourbon's sweetness, no sugar actually survives the distillation process. Instead, the almost tasteless corn allows the flavors from the barrel and other flavoring grains in the mash, like rye and wheat, to stand out more prominently. But corn isn't the only thing that makes bourbon special. The type of barrels and the amount of char they have on the inside is another component for the flavor and aroma of this American whiskey. In fact, another regulation that bourbon carries is the type of barrel that it is aged in. To be called bourbon, the distilled spirit must be aged in nothing but brand new oak barrels. That means the barrel cannot have held any other spirit or wine before being used for the bourbon. The oak barrels introduce more complexity, as well as sweeter notes and aromas to bourbon. Though the barrel has to be new and it has to be oak for your spirit to be called bourbon, there is one component that distillers can alter to change the outcome of their product. The char, or the degree to which the inside of the barrel is torched, is up to the craftspeople producing the spirit. Some bourbon barrels will have a very mild or light char, while others are placed in heavily charred barrels. The more charred the barrel, the spicier the bourbon's flavor will be. Like other spirits, bourbon must reach a specific level of alcohol by volume to officially be labeled bourbon. When it comes to this particular type of whiskey, the mash cannot go over 160 proof, or 80% ABV, before it is aged. It must be reduced to a maximum of 125 proof, or 62.5% ABV, in the barrel before being bottled. Though bourbon's ABV cannot be above 62.5% when it is bottled, it can come down further, though the spirit can be no less than 40% ABV. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. Some bourbon's flavor profiles benefit from the lower proof. The lower ABV bourbons can be more approachable to some drinkers than their maxed out brethren. An interesting misconception is that bourbon has to be made in Kentucky. This notion probably stems from the production of other alcoholic drinks like champagne. That sparkling wine must be made in a specific location to be certified as champagne. This isn't so for bourbon. The association with Kentucky is more likely because a large percentage of bourbon is, and has been for many years, made in Bourbon County, Kentucky. Bourbon is ultimately an American version of whiskey, and it can be made anywhere in the United States, so long as it follows the stringent guidelines imposed on it.
Bourbon's over 200 years old. It's an American invention. We created it, created the entire category.
Bourbon is characteristically sweeter than most other whiskeys, even though it does usually have hints of spice and smoke due to the charring of the barrels. The more corn that is used in the bourbon mash, the sweeter the overall spirit will likely be. Apart from smoke and sweet notes, there are other more complex flavors and aromas that an experienced taster will recognize. Since the barrels are always oak, vanilla is a common note. The charred oak often brings caramel or toffee to mind as well. Sometimes bourbon might even favor spices like cinnamon. Other whiskeys, like Scotch, are in general far less sweet. Instead, these types of whiskey tend to favor more earthy flavors like leather or wood. Different grain ratios in the mash will also provide different flavor profiles. Whiskeys made with unmalted barley tend to be slightly sour, while those made with more rye in their mash will be peppery and dry. Bourbon and whiskey are both used rather interchangeably in many cocktails.
Rye okay with you?
You look like you know what you're doing.
Bourbon will likely make the drink taste sweeter, though most cocktails include other ingredients that balance the flavors anyway. Some drinks, however, inherently favor a specific spirit. Irish coffee is more often made with Irish whiskey than it is bourbon. The Sazerac, on the other hand, is best when made specifically with rye. However, it's the classic old-fashioned that comes to life with a fine bourbon.
How does Jack Daniel's harness the magic of a sugar maple? Which famous crooner got his own posthumous type of whiskey? And what's the absolute best thing that Jack Daniel's makes? Stay tuned. While Jack Daniel's number 27 Gold has positive reviews, it's almost impossible to find. And that's one of the main reasons this whiskey has found itself on the bottom shelf, figuratively speaking. The other reason is that it's pretty pricey, starting at around $100, according to Wine Searcher. This whiskey is distilled somewhat like its cousin number 7 Black Label, which the official website says is mellowed drop by drop through 10 feet of sugar maple charcoal. To get its rich, vibrant hue, Jack Daniel's number 27 Gold is filtered twice. The whiskey is also matured twice, with the second aging period happening in maple barrels, instead of the usual charred oak. This results in the high-quality liquid gold Tennessee whiskey. But as mentioned, you're not going to find this at your local liquor store or grocery chain. Jack Daniel's number 27 Gold is only available at select duty-free retailers around the globe. What does duty-free mean? That you're usually only going to find this precious bottle in airports, seaports, or train stations. If you're looking to experience the depth, intense, rich flavor of Jack Daniel's single barrel line, you might want to try the 100 proof bottled in bond. Look no further than your local airport, because that's generally the only place you can find it, which is the main reason why this whiskey is bunking up in the bottom tier next to Jack Daniel's number 27 Gold. It's around $100 and it's pretty much flammable, which makes you wonder why it's only available at airports. Some say it's overly sweet, which can make it go down easily or not at all.
Whiskey makers are very strict, very specific. People take their whiskey very, very seriously.
One reviewer said, "I couldn't be bothered drinking the rest. The kitchen sink took one for the team." While it still has the signature oaky banana and maple syrup aroma, one Vision Viral contributor pointed out that it has an almost buttery-like finish with a hint of Hostess cherry pie. Not quite sure about comparing whiskey to 50-cent gas station snacks. It might seem like a travesty having Jack Daniel's Tennessee Fire, also known as Red Label, one step up from the incredibly rare and expensive number 27 Gold, but spot sharing isn't an option here. Tennessee Fire is sitting comfortably in the depths of whiskey hell, right where it belongs. This whiskey is a blend of Jack Daniel's number 7 and cinnamon liqueur. The good thing is that it's made with real cinnamon. That's where it stops. One distiller reviewer likened it to a spoonful of cinnamon-flavored syrup, adding, "One sip feels like it is giving you diabetes." Jack Daniel's Tennessee Fire retails at around $20, so take that into consideration. Walmart has it priced slightly cheaper, so that's saying something. But can you really base a rating off of price alone? Remember that taste is also being taken into consideration. Can it really be that bad? Well, Jack Daniel's Tennessee Fire is probably geared more toward making cocktails or being used with mixers, and is comparable to Fireball whiskey. So if you like Fireball, then you might want to try this cough syrup. If you really love cinnamon and whiskey, then perhaps this is totally your thing.
And last but certainly not least, my favorite, the Jack Daniel's Tennessee Fire.
Following its fiery sister is Jack Daniel's Tennessee Apple, though not nearly as bad. Since reviewers often note that it would work well in an apple martini, according to Influencer. If you've ever had an apple or caramel apple martini, you know that being a good candidate for this mixer can mean only one thing: it's sweet. Jack Daniel's Tennessee Apple has a bad reputation for smelling relatively good, but its saccharine taste sits much too long, according to Drink Hacker. As one reviewer on Distiller laments, it has a super sweet, cloying taste of sugar and apple candy. If you like whiskey, apple candy, and getting cavities, then you might want to try some of this juice. It retails for around 20 smackaroos, which is much less than the cost of getting a cavity filled. Jack Daniel's Tennessee Straight Rye is made with a 70% rye grain bill and uses water from Cave Spring Hollow, the distiller's own personal natural spring.
It makes a huge difference, and that's largely because they all have different whiskey-making traditions.
This is supposedly one of the first new recipes created by the distillery in over 150 years, which could be a good or a bad thing.
Considering the spirit is still pretty low on the totem pole, it's not looking too great at this point. The Jack Daniel's website describes it as undeniably spicy and complex, yet sippin' smooth, while the whiskey shelf goes on the record stating that rye whiskeys usually have a lot of mint, anise, and tropical fruits, but they're all completely lacking here. It just smells and tastes like young, cheap, and watered-down whiskey. Perhaps that's why this whiskey's suggested retail price is under the $20 mark. Jack Daniel's Winter Cider, also known as the Winter Jack, could be your new BFF during the colder months. With a price point in the $20 zone, Winter Jack is based on an old Jack Daniel's family recipe, even though he was never married or had kids. This Christmassy-feeling whiskey will leave you feeling warm and fuzzy inside. It's essentially just spiked apple cider liqueur that's been blended with old reliable Jack Daniel's No. 7. It's labeled as having wintry, holiday spices, which usually include cinnamon, nutmeg, allspice, ginger, and clove. Intoxicology states that this is a booze you'll either love or hate, but that, more than anything, it's like an adult version of apple cider. So if Winter Jack has a pretty good rating when it comes to taste and price, what's it doing so low on the list? It's a seasonal release, so you can really only enjoy it for a few months during the year. Bummer. Jack Daniel's Green Label whiskey still undergoes the same sugar maple mellowing, but the barrels the liquid spends its maturing time in are located on the lower floors and toward the center of the barrel house. It's only available in a few states, and the constant search for this elusive spirit is what keeps it popular. It's what Difford's Guide refers to as, quote, value bottling, which basically means it's incredibly rare and that people will have to pay a lot more for it. Green Label hits this midpoint on this list for its rarity. You never know where it'll pop up next. Perhaps if people tasted it first, they'd understand that it's not that great. The distillery says it's a lighter color and character, which is confirmed by Whiskey Review. And while it still has the caramel and vanilla flavors, the telltale banana essence isn't as prominent, but the raw alcohol burn is prominent. Maybe whiskey sleuths are chasing after Green Label because it has a pleasant amber hue and a very faint green tinge. They're searching for something not everyone will see, just like searching for the green flash at sunset. Smack in the middle of this list is Jack Daniel's Single Barrel Rye. Now, this whiskey is pretty darn unique in that it's the distillery's first new mash recipe since 1866.
I wanted it to be something special. This particular product has a little bit more age on it.
Keep in mind that rye whiskey isn't for everyone. The website, A Couple Cooks, notes that ryes are grassy tasting, and depending on the brand can have smoke, oak, or fruit notes. They also have a spicier finish, as in hints of pepper. Jack Daniel's website states that its single barrel rye is, quote, grain forward, which according to liquor.com is another way to say it could taste like oatmeal, cornbread, wheat flakes, or younger bourbons. Some Redditors found it rather pleasant and a nice sip, though lacking in the sweet department, while Whiskey Fellow was more offended by the overwhelming presence of corn and the waste of $55. Coy Hill is the highest elevated rolling hill on the Jack Daniel's property, and this high-proof whiskey is named in honor of it. Okay, so Jack Daniel's Single Barrel 2021 Special Release isn't actually honoring just any rolling hill. It's also paying respect to the actual location of the barrel house where Jack Daniel's spirits hang out and mature. This means that the barrels are left to the mercy of the elements, which actually help to give it character. The 2021 Special Release Coy Hill High Proof is also matured in a specific section of the barrel house, which is pretty noteworthy. For around $70, you too can be the proud owner of a single barrel Special Release 2021 Coy Hill High Proof. And high proof it is. This bottle clocks in at around 148 proof, and according to the website, is bottled in its purest form straight from the barrel with minimal filtration. It's middle of the road because of its overwhelming heat. Plus, you're basically paying for a novelty bottle and a cool story, and possibly growing some hair on your chest. This is the old school Jack Daniel's. Everyone knows this bottle. It's what you'll usually zone in on mid-tier at the grocery store, and what your bartender will be mixing into your whiskey sour. Jack Daniel's Old No. 7 also goes by the name Black Label. This whiskey is mellowed through 10 feet of sugar maple charcoal over a 4 to 6 day span. The process is meant to remove any impurities and smooth out the flavor of the whiskey before it's put into aging barrels. The Flavier website comments that Jack Daniel's Old No. 7 smells like bananas and Cracker Jacks. And for those of you who don't know what Cracker Jacks are, just think of it as the perfect ballpark treat in the early to mid-1900s. It sits perfectly in this spot because reviewers think it's rather basic and boring. citing it as decent but lacking complexity and that it's best used as a mixer. And it's not going to put you back a lot of dough if you invest in a bottle. Gentleman Jack is one of the more well-known brands in the Jack Daniel's family. Similar to the more expensive and rather elusive Jack Daniel's No. 27 Gold, Gentleman Jack undergoes a double run through the 10-foot sugar maple charcoal tub to ensure the taste is as smooth as the bottle.
When you've used your talents to make better your present condition, whatever it is, I find inspiration in that.
It wins this spot because of ease of availability and a decent price, around $25. What knocks it down a few notches is that reviewers are split when it comes to the taste. It's reported that Gentleman Jack is incredibly smooth and balanced, with caramel and vanilla being the main scent contenders. The whiskey shelf points out that it is indeed smooth and balanced, but it also lacks character. It's basically really vanilla, and that's not the flavor they're talking about. This spirit's profile doesn't seem to sit in line with who the real Jack Daniel's was. One reviewer said this: "It's inoffensive and boring to sip neat. I honestly don't see any reason why anyone would buy this, apart from nostalgia." But one positive word that did seem to span across the review boards is that Gentleman Jack goes down easy. Well, at least there's agreement on something. If the sugary, syrupy Jack Daniel's sweet whiskeys are reserved for the bottom of the list, what's this Tennessee honey doing all the way up here? Well, it's modestly priced right around the $25 mark, goes great in cocktails and mixers, and is also tasty as is, both in shot form or on the rocks. Jack Daniel's Tennessee Honey is a blended whiskey, and if you haven't picked up on it yet, is just honey liqueur mixed with the globally beloved Jack Daniel's No. 7. What sets this sweet nectar apart from its crazy siblings is that it doesn't actually taste artificial, so that already adds to its street cred. Opinions differ. It's not overly sweet according to Spruce Eats, and really does just taste like whiskey with a shot of honey in it. On Reddit, many responders mentioned that it's really sweet, but not in a bad way. One reviewer said, "It's a really sweet alcoholic drink that should be taken only in shots. Kinda like a bag of marshmallows. You can eat some of it, but never a whole lot at a single time." This whiskey gets a few more steps up the booze chain because it's not only great for drinking, it's also a nice addition to food recipes. This is a legit, fiery, high-proof whiskey that isn't for the faint of heart, retailing for around $70. What makes Jack Daniel's single barrel proof so intense is that according to the website, it's bottled straight from the barrel at its full proof. As potent as it is, the proof can be anywhere from 125 to 140. The flavor is still super smooth and dangerously easy to consume, and the typical Jack Daniel's oak and vanilla flavors are heightened to a new level. Whiskey Raters called it a banana bomb, which still sounds like it could be a good thing, but their 6 out of 10 rating says otherwise. This response isn't echoed with other reviewers. One distiller taster said that it wasn't too hot, which they were expecting from a whiskey with this high of a proof. One Reddit reviewer even compares the flavor to maple syrup and buttered pancakes. And, while it might not be for everybody, Rickhouse Rambling says, "If you have not tried this and are historically against Jack Daniel's products, I would recommend giving this one a shot." It's obvious Jack Daniel's is a whiskey you either love or hate, but no matter what, this whiskey definitely has a following. You could even liken this dedication to, musicians and their fans. Speaking of musicians, do you know who is also a devoted Jack drinker? Old Blue Eyes himself. That's right, Frank Sinatra. With a voice as smooth as the Tennessee whiskey he so dearly loved, Sinatra referred to Jack Daniel's as, quote, "nectar of the gods," and was actually buried with a bottle of it. According to Smithsonian Magazine, that's probably some of the best marketing a business can receive, right? In honor of their most dedicated fan and ambassador, Jack Daniel's created Sinatra Select. It's aged in special barrels, dubbed Sinatra barrels, which have unique grooves carved into their interiors. These indentations expose the whiskey to more of the oak layers and create a deep amber hue with notes of cola, vanilla, and caramel. Though some claim that the grooves introduce too much of a tannic flavor, a reviewer on Distiller said that it basically made them believe in Jack Daniel's again, rating Sinatra Select a 4.5 out of 5. If you're wondering why it didn't earn the Best Of title, it's because one bottle of Sinatra Select will put you back a minimum of $150. While Jack Daniel's Green Label whiskeys are matured toward the middle and on the bottom levels of the barrel houses, this one is pretty much the opposite. Jack Daniel's Single Barrel Select is bottled at 94 proof. It's allowed to mature in the standard charred oak barrels, except these whiskeys are allowed to mature in the uppermost part of the barrel house, which is referred to as the Angel's Roost. The barrels are exposed to the sometimes extreme weather that the location gets, and you can taste that unique profile in this spirit. It's a whiskey with a unique nose. One Redditor says it smells of brown sugar and bubblegum, which sounds like Jones Soda should be coming up with that flavor any day now. There's also mention that it does have some lingering spiciness, but not in an unpleasant ethanol burn sort of way.
When it comes to whiskey, it can be really hard to know what to order.
Rickhouse Rambling suggests adding a bit of water to it as it brings out different nuances, like butterscotch, oatmeal, granola, and mango tea. Yeah, that sounds unique. Jack Daniel's Single Barrel Select must be touched by angels while it's aging in the rafters, because the liquid that comes from those sky-high barrels ends up being an all-around easy drink, and is also pretty affordable, starting at around $43. This is the Jack Daniel's bottle you've been waiting for, the best of the core bottle family. Jack Daniel's 10 Years Old Tennessee Whiskey is the first whiskey to be released with an age statement in more than 100 years. It undergoes the exact same mellowing process that the main bottles do, getting poured through that sweet sugar maple charcoal impurity destroyer, and after that is where the magic begins. This 97 proof whiskey, which is the first of its kind for the distillery, is put in the same handcrafted charred white oak barrels, in the same barrel house as the others. But as the saying goes, it's really all about location, location, location. These whiskey barrels are first placed up high in the buzzard's roost. It's pretty much the angel's roost, but the name has a bit more of an edge to it. Each location these barrels live is exposed to different types of extreme weather, for 10 summers in a row. They're continually relocated to different levels of the barrel house during this time frame. The resulting whiskey is intense and deep. It still has its banana flambe touch, but also tastes like a smoky butterscotch, and has an essence of fig, tobacco, raisin, and a pleasant spice. And according to Jack Daniel's master distiller, this magical elixir can be yours for only $70.
If Westerns are to be believed, the first American settlers in the Wild West drank more whiskey than water. In fact, it's so important to American culture that in 1794, Americans literally rebelled against a founding father, President George Washington, over whiskey, according to history. Basically, there is no liquor more American than whiskey. And while America makes a lot of whiskeys, Jack Daniel's is probably the most famous. In case you were in any doubt about the popularity of Jack Daniel's, it reportedly sold 13.3 million 9-liter cases of its whiskey in 2018, which is pretty incredible. And rumor has it that the great Frank Sinatra wouldn't let a concert go by without toasting with a glass of Jack. The only logical conclusion is that you can't beat the taste of Jack Daniel's. Apparently, the product's distinctive taste is all down to how it's distilled in the so-called Lincoln County process. According to Discover, the process dates back hundreds of years and relies on a special secret ingredient, and that's charcoal. Along with charcoal, the distinctive taste of Jack Daniel's relies on knowledge passed down from an enslaved African-American man known as Uncle Nearest Green, whose real name was Nathan. After researching Nearest, author Fawn Weaver launched a whiskey in his honor. Historians now believe that slaves brought over a version of Jack Daniel's distilling technique from West Africa, where it's not uncommon to cook foods and filter drinks over charcoal. Nearest Green, who undoubtedly inherited these techniques from his ancestors, reportedly worked as Jack Daniel's first distiller, a tradition which was carried on by his children and grandchildren. The Greens would teach Jack Daniel that filtering whiskey through charred sugar maple dramatically changes its taste. Meanwhile, filtering freshly distilled, unaged whiskey over charcoal mellows the liquor's taste by reducing the strength of some of these by up to 50%.
Here at Jack Daniel's, charcoal is held in a higher regard, so much so that we make our own.
The technique is not as novel as it sounds. As it turns out, charcoal is also commonly used to remove impurities and polish the flavor of vodka. But while Jack Daniel's uses maple, vodka distillers prefer silver and birch, according to spirits distilled. Tequila has also jumped on the charcoal filtering bandwagon. But as charcoal filtering is not unique to the Jack Daniel's brand, there must be other secrets behind its exquisite taste profile. First, it's important to understand there are certain standards a distiller must uphold in order for a bottle of the liquor to achieve the rich, smooth, woody tastes associated with Tennessee whiskey. For one, it must be distilled from at least 51% corn. Secondly, it must be filtered through maple charcoal. And third, it must be aged in new charred oak barrels and bottled at over 80 proof, according to Time. Jack Daniel's, of course, isn't just any old Tennessee whiskey. That's thanks to what may be a third secret ingredient, and that's the water that's used in production. According to Jack Daniel's, they use fresh limestone spring water from Cave Spring Hollow, Lynchburg, Tennessee, in their distilling process. The iron-free water runs year-round at about 56 degrees Fahrenheit per New Food magazine. And it's not just dumb luck that Jack Daniel's is located next to Cave Spring Hollow. Instead, Jack Daniel founded his distillery based upon the location of the spring alone. And when you know a little bit more about the distilling process, you can truly appreciate the importance of water. As Artisan Spirit magazine explains, clean water with low alkaline levels is vital to healthy fermentation. Because yeast loves minerals. The water's mineral content also aids the fermentation process. As far as we know, Jack Daniel's hasn't played around with using different kinds of water in its distillation process. But in 2015, a group of gin distillers did. According to Wired, the group of distillers made the same gin 6 times. The only difference was that each time the distillers used 6 different kinds of water, from French mineral spring water to tap water. As expected, tasters noticed the differences immediately. The experiment was not scientifically reviewed, but its results were nonetheless compelling and proved that water really matters when you're striving to make high-quality liquor. So, is Cave Spring Hollow Jack Daniel's big secret? We don't know exactly what makes the taste of Jack Daniel's so distinctive. However, we do know that it is something very special.
Remarkable range, deep warming complexity, and a mighty money pot that helps keep the hospitality industry running like a well-oiled machine. The choices at the liquor store can be overwhelming, but is Bulleit Bourbon a winner? Let's talk. The Bulleit story starts back in Louisville, Kentucky in 1830, a time when bourbon production was simmering and flavor experimentation was on the forefront. Tavern owner Augustus Bulleit worked endless hours to fine-tune his exploratory whiskey varieties, attempting to concoct a blend that would stand out among the rest. Eventually, he honed in on a high rye recipe, and according to Forbes' travel guide, Bulleit ended up setting sail to New Orleans alongside his coveted barrel in hopes of commercializing his product. And that's when he completely vanished. To this day, no one knows what happened to this unfortunate soul, and it wasn't until 1987 that Thomas E. Bulleit Jr. decided to pick up the family torch again and revive his great-great-grandfather's exclusive recipe. For a long time, whiskey drinkers questioned the production location of Bulleit, as there were zero traces of it online, raising some big questions. A lawsuit was eventually filed by 2 California law firms back in 2015, accusing the brand of violating California consumer protection laws over its labeling for Bulleit bourbon. In a nutshell, the label was deemed as misleading, as the language claimed the production resided in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky. However, parent company Diageo never operated a distillery in this vicinity. However, around a year after the lawsuit, Diageo announced major plans to invest $115 million in a Bulleit-branded distillery in Shelby County, Kentucky, finally putting future speculation to bed. If you're thinking about launching your own bourbon line soon, don't take design inspo from Bulleit. You might find yourself in a serious trademark infringement lawsuit just like Redemption. That's right, Diageo fired back when Redemption released a bottle that closely mirrored the signature long and narrow cylinder-shaped Bulleit bottle, claiming it infringed upon the brand's image. This copycat bottle propelled Diageo to pursue destruction of infringing products and injunctive relief. Prior to this dispute, Bulleit also targeted Sazerac around the same issue, specifically around Dr. McGillicuddy's liqueur's new design that closely resembled Bulleit. But lucky for Bulleit, Sazerac agreed to pivot their design plans, and both parties reached an agreement outside the courtroom. When it comes to packaging, it's also worth noting Bulleit's intentional crooked label. Never noticed it? You're probably not alone, but it's actually a deliberate part of their look. According to Men's Journal, back in the 1800s, any sort of label apparent on a bottle would have been wrapped and of course slightly warped. Now the crooked label is most definitely part of Bulleit's trademarked branding. According to Vegas magazine, a foundation called the Bulleit Frontier Fund was founded with a mission to keep restaurants and bartenders afloat, specifically during the global COVID-19 pandemic and throughout the waves of shutdowns. At the heart of it, a $250,000 mighty money pot to keep the hospitality industry running like a well-oiled machine. Not only does Bulleit constantly donate from a monetary perspective, but they've also released a strategic educational platform to keep bartenders' skills sharpened with at-home cocktail making classes and industry insights, tagged under the specific hashtag Bulleit Bar Skills. Bulleit is also committed to hiring real bartenders for content creation and commercials, opening up new money-making gateways for those professionals. Aside from this, Bulleit is also a partner of Sourced Craft Cocktails, which employs bartenders to make cocktails for home delivery. It's a creative and clever way to give back to the hospitality industry while also incentivizing bartenders across America to keep pouring Bulleit through a tumultuous time in history.
Another work from home day in the books. Time for a cocktail. Who's with me? Charlie, cocktail? Bobby? Mark?
Bulleit's innate character is slightly bold and spicy. There's a certain element of smoothness that's irresistible. Upon first whiff, you'll detect a complex blend of fruitiness, including sour peach, baked apple, pineapple, and dried orange. After swirling, the citrus notes are accentuated, potentially transporting you to the tropical islands of Fiji. On the first sip, you'll arrive at another level of explosive flavor, notes of roasted vanilla, honey, baked apple, and licorice, along with some spices, including clove, cinnamon, and fennel. Based on the Beverage Tasting Institute Chicago's review, the medium-bodied palate is described as light, approachable, and refreshing. This is a type of alcohol that warms you, exuding an elongated, velvety smooth finish. So before taking one sip, get ready for something completely multidimensional. You'll certainly ignite all of the senses.
You can't bring in your own bottle.
You carry Bulleit bourbon?
No.
Yeah, well, I do.
Let's just say if you're looking for a peppery bite, bourbon with high rye content is the best way to go. It's no secret by now that Bulleit's specialty is rye-forward bourbon. It's been that way since Augustus Bulleit started operations back in the 1800s. The mash bill of the standard Bulleit is exactly 68% corn, 28% rye, and 4% barley for their regular bourbon, leaving you with a spicier finish. And that? It's important, as it's what makes Bulleit stand out from the crowd of other types of bourbon. Not enough rye? You can also opt for the Bulleit Rye. As the name suggests, this one is made with even more rye and comes with a completely different flavor profile. Due to Bulleit's remarkable range and deep complexity, it naturally dominates in the versatility department, meaning you can consume it in a variety of ways and still reap all of the tasty benefits. While you can absolutely drink Bulleit on the rocks, straight, or with a bit of water, club soda, or ginger ale, the possibilities don't stop there. Bulleit has developed a plethora of colorful cocktail recipes to choose from, including a bartender's favorite, Bourbon Swizzle, a sweet and slightly sour concoction that incorporates bourbon, a swirl of citrus, spicy ginger, fresh mint leaves, and aromatic bitters. Perfectly refreshing on a warm spring afternoon on the porch, if you ask us. Basically, the moral of the story is that you can't go wrong with your preferred method of drinking Bulleit, making it a must-have in your spirit cabinet.
Travel from Ireland to Japan without leaving your home by pouring a glass of whiskey. Here's 13 types you should know about. As the name might imply, Irish single malt whiskey comes from the Emerald Isle of Ireland. And the name also might imply it must come from a single malt rather than a blend of malts, according to VinePair. That is to say, when barley is malted in the whiskey production process, different malts are sometimes put together in the same barrel to create complex or contrasting flavors. In the case of Irish single malt, indeed all single malts, only one may be used.
Are you drunk? I couldn't handle the pressure, Stewie. We Irish? We have a deep sadness.
In addition to these guidelines, Irish single malt must also be aged in oak for at least 3 years before being bottled, and all of this must happen at the same distillery, according to Master of Malt. As far as tasting notes, these can vary widely depending on the distillery and how long it's aged the whiskey. Bushmills is probably the best-known Irish single malt on the market, and it is the oldest licensed whiskey distillery in the world. It often ages its whiskeys in sherry and port casks, giving fruity aromas and flavors to many of its creations. With single-grain whiskey, the word single means something a little different than it does with single malt. Somewhat confusingly, single-grain whiskeys can use one grain or a variety of grains, depending on the recipe. But it must all come from one single distillery, and in the case of Irish single grain, and Scotch too, it must be aged for a minimum of 3 years. It's also frequently triple distilled. Single grains are more of an ingredient than a standalone product, often blended with single malts and other whiskeys to create signature blends. You won't find a ton of them out there for purchase, though Jameson's Black Barrel Proof is one example, as is Hyde's Cask Strength 8-Year. Irish single grains are easy drinking and tend to skew on the sweeter side. They're aged in used barrels as well, and avoid the smoky notes that whiskeys aged in charred barrels can have. Irish Single Pot Still is Ireland's most unique whiskey, a form of single malt that can only be produced in that country. The main differentiator between Irish Single Pot Still whiskey and regular Irish single malt is that it is made from unmalted or green barley, which gives it a grittier, greenier, almost earthy flavor. The special to Ireland style is also made in a pot still, a copper still with a craned neck, as opposed to a column still, the type used for clearer spirits like tequila and rum. It's not abundantly common, especially in the United States market, but some brands to look out for are Redbreast 12-year-old cask strength and Green Spot.
Hey, Michael McLeod's just invented a new kind of beverage in his basement. Whiskey.
If you're good at stuff like deduction, you may have figured out that Scotch whiskey is from Scotland, but within that country, you'll find a number of distinct styles depending on the region where it was distilled. The largest and most varied is Highland Scotch, which encompasses the northern part of Scotland, ranging from the mountains to the furthest islands, according to the Whiskey Wash. This region became Hollywood famous as the setting for films like Braveheart and James Bond's Skyfall, but it's fairly unpopulated today. Most whiskeys from this diverse region are single malts, meaning they came from a single distillery made from all malted barley. The region is vast, and because terrain varies throughout the Highlands, it's hard to drill down one specific flavor profile. That said, Highland Scotch often has a peaty tone with a floral and silky smooth mouthfeel, though citrus and smoke are also prevalent in many varieties. Common Highland Scotches you may find are Oban Glenmorangie and Talisker. Lowland Scotch comes from the southern part of Scotland, a flatter, more agriculturally oriented region of the country. These Scotches are milder than their northern brethren, the vast farmlands producing a whiskey that's neither peaty nor hefty. The abundance of corn and wheat in the region allows lowland Scotches to use grains other than malted barley, mostly corn and wheat. Lowland whiskies are also typically triple distilled in column stills, giving them a mild, smooth profile that's earned them the nickname Lowland Ladies. This smoothness makes lowland Scotches well suited to those new to whiskey and also makes them popular in blends. Honeysuckle, cream, ginger, and toffee are the most commonly cited tasting notes. You won't find a ton of lowland whiskies on the shelf, but if you can get your hands on some Ailsa Bay, give it a try. Scotland boasts over 790 different islands, and to stand out as the Scottish island with its own style of whiskey, you've got to be doing something right, or at least something different. Such is the case with Islay, an island of just over 3,000 people according to Islay Info, where nearly everyone is in the whiskey business. Islay Scotches are known for their peat, an earthy, mouth-puckering flavor. Some love it, some hate it, but Islay does it best. Legend has it, Islay is where the first Scotch whiskies were made, though that's never been confirmed, and its creations are unlike anything else in the country. You'll find strong notes of smoke, pepper, and earth in nearly every Islay Scotch, though some hit a lot harder than others. They're nearly all complex, and few could be described as easy drinking. But if you're in for an adventure, try Lafroig, Ardbeg, or Lagavulin, all of which are relatively easy to find in America. Probably the most commonly found Scotch whiskies are Speyside, originating from a northeastern coastal section of the country. It's the most densely populated whiskey region in Scotland, and as such boasts over half the nation's distilleries and biggest brands. Names like Glenfiddich, Glenlivet, and Cardew, Johnny Walker's first distillery, all come from Speyside. So if you've tried Scotch, odds are you've tried one of these. Cardew can be broken down into two varieties, sweet and grassy. These notes are a result of the casks used to age the whiskeys. For a fruitier flavored, distillers use oak casks. For the earthier, lighter flavors, sherry casks are the move. Speysides are a little peatier than lowland whiskeys, but not quite as strong as those from Islay. In America, bourbon and whiskey are often used interchangeably when describing a grain spirit, typically originating somewhere in the South. And while that's somewhat correct, it's not entirely accurate. Bourbon is a very specific type of whiskey, so referring to your wild turkey as whiskey is all good. But throwing any old brown spirit into a glass and calling it bourbon isn't always going to hold up.
I've fretted iron stoves up harder grades than this.
First things first, for a whiskey to call itself bourbon, it has to be made with 51% or more corn. It can use other grains too, but to achieve the desired sweetness, it has to be over half corn. Then the spirit needs to be aged in never-used charred oak barrels for at least 2 years. This is why you often see American bourbon barrels when you tour distilleries in Scotland. Each barrel can only be used once, so they've got to go somewhere, and they're often sent on to second lives aging liquors like scotch, rum, and tequila. Further, the original mash has to be distilled to 160 proof, then aged until it's 125 proof or less. Finally, bourbon must be diluted to 80 proof or about 40% alcohol by volume. Bourbon usually swings to the sweet side with strong influences from oak, caramel, and vanilla. Tennessee whiskey is a special style of bourbon that can only be produced in Tennessee, in a process by which every whiskey must be charcoal filtered before it's bottled. This gives it a slightly different flavor than other bourbons and accounts for the distinct notes you'll find in names like Jack Daniel's. Like all bourbons, Tennessee whiskey is overwhelmingly sweet with vanilla, caramel, and oak overtones, but you may also notice a bit more smoothness in this variety thanks to its extra charcoal filtering. Rye is a form of American whiskey made from 51% or more rye grain. Rye follows most of the same production rules as bourbon does too, requiring an initial proof of no more than 160 that's diluted down to 125 proof or less. Yes, it's a science. It is also aged in brand new charred oak barrels, but rye differs in that it must be aged at least 2 years and it cannot be mixed with any other spirit to be called rye. But just because rye whiskey uses a similar grain to the bread you use for a pastrami sandwich, don't expect the flavor to be even remotely similar. Rye whiskey is a lot sharper than bourbon, credited to the different grain. Beyond that, flavors really depend on which one you're drinking. George Dickel, Bulleit, and Wild Turkey are some of the brands you may commonly see. American single malt is sort of the Wild West of American spirits, as the relatively new genre doesn't really have anything regulating what it has to be. In its essence, American single malt is a U.S. take on the Scotch and Irish original, a malted barley whiskey aged in sherry or bourbon casks and aged for different amounts of time. But because whiskeys age differently in America depending on where they're located, a whiskey in Arizona will age very differently than one in Seattle, there's no aging minimum nor even a claim to a whiskey's age. According to ScotchWhiskey.com, the relatively new American Single Malt Commission has proposed some guidelines for the young category, suggesting a 100% malted barley mash distilled at no more than 160 proof and bottled at no more than 125 proof. Flavors generally mirror Scotch and Irish whiskeys to a point, the malted barley giving many a smoky, toasted flavor. If you're up for trying some, Stranahans from Colorado and Balcones in Texas are known for their single malts. Where American whiskey styles like bourbon and rye have strict regulations as to the types of grains, barrels, and filtering used in the production process, in Canada, the only rule is pretty much as follows: it has to come from Canada. Okay, so that's not completely true. A Canadian whiskey must be made up of cereal grain products, wheat, rye, corn, rice, oats, barley, and sorghum, be aged in wood barrels of under 700 liters for a minimum of 3 years. In addition, it must possess the aroma, taste, and character generally attributed to Canadian whiskey. Pretty vague, yes, especially since Canadian whiskeys are also allowed to use caramel coloring and up to 9.09% flavoring. Most are wheat-based since the country has an abundance of that particular grain. Because the rules are all over the place, so are flavors. But Canadian Club and Crown Royal are the two brands you'll probably encounter most. Japanese whiskey might be the hottest new kid on the block, with one study reporting the global market for it has been growing steadily and is projected to keep growing. If you've tried it, you probably know why, as the Japanese took a cue from the Scotch and have crafted their take on the spirit in much the same way. Many distilleries import their ingredients from Scotland, and nearly all of the country's dozen or so distilleries make a single malt, as reported by Time Out. Interestingly, demand for this stuff grew so much that Japanese distilleries weren't able to keep up, and they began using imported base spirits in their blends to increase production. As a result, in 2021, Japan finally passed guidelines for what can constitute a Japanese whiskey. By 2024, all Japanese whiskeys must be fermented, aged, and distilled inside Japan. They must contain some malted grain, use water sourced in Japan, be aged a minimum of 3 years, and be bottled in the country. Though it will be a couple of years before you can guarantee authenticity, you'd still be well served to try Suntory or Nikka if you see it in a bar. Japanese whiskey generally tastes like Scotch with less peat and more of a nutty flavor.
For relaxing times, make it Suntory time.